Okay, well, as Ellis said, I think for some time architects have been really interested in the bright bits on this map of Europe in the kind of urban centres. And I guess increasingly I've been realising that the work that we're most involved with are on a series of peripheries, either, and I suppose those peripheries have been sublimated in architectural discourse, cultural discourse for some time, and it feels like there is a new urgency, a sort of resonance about them. And I guess those peripheries, it seems, are like a series of sort of bits of an onion, that they operate at different scales. Whether it's this kind of set of urban hinterlands, if you like, provisioning hinterlands on the edge of the North Sea, or the kind of outside the urban centres, or whether it's this sort of constellation of spaces that are far enough from London's gravitational pull, about 50 miles away, where you start to get these new economies developing. Or whether within London itself it's this kind of band of Zone 2, Zone 3 locations, which all seem to be kind of being reworked and re-evaluated as we speak, from kind of Nine Elms to Old Oak, over to the Lea Valley, which is the location of the project I want to talk about. It's a project we've been involved with for about 8 years, the Lea River Park. So this kind of locates the Lea River Park. We're hovering over Hackney Marshes and the Olympic site, and we're looking down towards the Thames with the O2 at the top of the drawing. And the Lea River Park, which has this kind of central spine, which used to be called the Fat Walk, is now called the Leaway. We can talk about that perhaps, is the last piece of the Lea Valley to be realised between the Olympic Park and the Thames, southwards. Unlike the Olympic Park, I suppose, we knew from the outset that this wasn't a piece of tabula rasa. This was going to be a very slow burn project. It doesn't have the political attention, we certainly didn't have the budget, but we also didn't want to think of the project in that way. A sort of establishment of a new public landscape in this very inaccessible border country, it seemed, was quite a different kind of proposition from the Olympic Park. And a park here was not about kind of passive parkland scenery, but rather was animated by this kind of long tradition of provisioning the city, a sort of cornucopia, if you like. This part of the Lea Valley, as Lynn has touched on, has looked after London for the last 2 millennia. It's looked after its fresh water, its sewage, its solid waste, still where huge amounts of solid waste is divided and sorted and sent away from London. It's where a great deal of its food is kind of figured out and packaged and made ready for supermarkets, and it was where a lot of food was grown. And of course, its electricity and gas runs through the valley. So this kind of picture of cornucopia seemed to be a very, very key image for us. And of course, pertinent to this discussion about the periphery, this was the edge of London. So that red line that runs up the Lea Valley was the edge of the city, and this is an extract from the 1944 London Plan. So the sort of borderline, and certainly this quality of boundary, a political boundary but also a physical boundary, is one that has left certain characteristics on the site. And I guess that the London Plan's author, Abercrombie, here is sort of great monochled patrician, imagined the Lea Valley being this kind of land reservation welded together. So that really locates our park, which is the yellow bit is the Olympic Park, and then the last 2.5 miles of that is the Lea River Park. And it's taken over 70 years to get to this point of making these sort of final connections between the Thames and the outer edge of London's Greenbelt that Abercrombie sort of, and others, of course, imagined back in the last days of the Second World War. And I guess that over the last 8 years, we've been trying to use top-down powers. So for a number of different clients, currently the London Legacy Development Corporation and the 2 adjacent boroughs. Before that, a number of other different clients, all of which have changed over the years between when we started the project in a boom and went through a bust. But dealing with this kind of incredibly fragmented landscape, which is this political boundary. It's also the back of all the riparian boroughs up it. So between Tower Hamlets and Newham, all the way up the river are boundaries between boroughs. So it makes it very difficult. It's this kind of quality of backland has created many of the conditions that we're dealing with. But also that sort of political severance is reinforced by really substantial physical severance and fragmentation. So the inability of people, populations either side, to realise that they live in a river valley and to access it is really quite strong. So the river itself, but down the river has been run rail lines, urban motorways, electricity pylons, you name it. It's a really problematic landscape. So the intention was to realise from when we started in 2008 actually to before the Games was to turn this kind of no man's land into something that was connected both north, south and across the valley. And we're still working at that. But I suppose in terms of that kind of discussion of a periphery, a former periphery that's become more central, I guess I'm really interested in how one might talk about a kind of ages of periphery or a sort of ecology that changes over time that might help us to understand new peripheries and to go through those, that kind of sense in which, you know, this starts out being an agrarian opportunity with the Abbey at Stratford, you know, in the sort of late Middle Ages, starting to drain marshland and to build mills that characterise many of those kind of archipelago conditions that you get in the Lea Valley, followed by stuff that happens on the edge of a city like abattoirs. And the abattoirs produce finer kind of goods, like, for instance, the bone china that you find at Bow. And following that kind of agrarian tradition, you start to get these technical enclaves, a sort of instrumental landscape being built up, creating many of which are a kind of monocultural landscapes. And they include things like docks, gasworks, sewage pumping stations, water reservoirs, and hospitals, and so on and so on. And this is the condition that you find now, currently, in the lower Lea Valley, which makes it very, very difficult to get around, because this kind of tradition of enclaves, each with a bloody great fence around it, is antithetical to moving around. It isn't a public landscape. So the sort of final period where we find ourselves is trying to condition some of these infrastructural monocultures, like, you know, the remnants of West Ham Power Station, for instance, or more currently these dark stores or fulfillment centres, which are on the banks of the Lea. This is at Bow Locks, where you get kind of, when you order from Amazon or Sainsbury's, these dark stores are where stuff is packaged and sent to your door. So the current kind of prospect of creating a park, creating a public landscape, and embedding a community that can actually take control and interest in this landscape is happening through the creation of new infrastructures, just to sort of overcome some of these, if you like, to sort of lay siege to some of these sort of monocultural pieces of infrastructure. And I suppose to force a greater plurality to the landscape, to acknowledge the fact that it needs to do more than one thing. So these kind of first surgical pieces of connective infrastructure which are quite top-down, that used sort of land assembly powers, bits of engineering, are to broker a following on of a set of quite different landscapes, all of which, interestingly, emerge out of infrastructure projects. So at the top, the sort of land left over after the Tideway sewer pipe project finishes, or at 12 Trees, the reprovisioning of sort of gas storage releases this beautiful set of 7 listed Victorian gas holders. Or down at the Limo site, the end of Crossrail tunnelling renders another landscape. So these great kind of city-scaled infrastructure projects, which will, in time, we hope, render public space. So just to take you on a kind of whiz down the valley, this is a piece we've actually completed at 3 Mills Green, spaces for people to play and have barbecues and enjoy this sort of western sunny edge of the Lea. A bit further down, this is about to go on site, so the great victory here is bringing into public use this privately owned bridge, which was built to carry gas pipes across the Lea, but is an incredible sort of belvedere over Bow Locks and this stretch of river. We're building this kind of connector, again, between 2 riverside paths that at the moment don't connect. Sort of further down, giving you some notion of this extraordinary wild river reaches, a new bridge at Poplar, which is hopefully going to happen quite soon. Again, on celebrating this bend in the river and these quite different sections of River Valley. And you can see Goldfinger's Balfron Tower. And here's where the Lea Valley, the River Lea hits the Thames. We're kind of hovering over the dome here with East India Dock Basin. You can really see how infrastructure, which in the city is forced into a kind of much more usual, polite relationship with everything else, here becomes a sort of engineer's wet dream, and it's all full tilt across the valley, whether that's the DLR or the A13 whizzing off to Essex, or the lower Lea crossing. But really quite problematic, actually, if you live in this in some of these areas. To just getting to work is quite a challenge. But there are some extraordinary qualities. So this area, which we've called the Exotic Wild, is this amazing sort of clearing within the city between these major pieces of infrastructure. So current projects here, for instance, are about mopping up these leftover unloved spaces here between the DLR and the A13, trying to create a new gateway into the park space like this, that also marks the passage, this kind of significance of crossing the Lea Valley on the A13, which otherwise you wouldn't know what's going on, and acknowledging states of tide and so on. Or this kind of silty puddle, East India Dock Basin, which was the kind of engine of London's economy in the 18th century, incredibly important, kind of brutal space, now seeming incredibly sort of insignificant. But we would like to bring this back into a kind of more powerful set of relationships between its contradictory relationships between its ecological significance, its sort of historical power, and its just incredible setting on the Thames. Won't really go into that, but as a space that has always been a sort of pleasure ground for Londoners, as a place where you might start to enjoy your journey into the Lea Valley with visitor infrastructure, etc. And incredible structures like this. So this is from the Dangleway, the what's it called, ski lift thing, over the Thames, coming into Silvertown Way, this amazing structure which we're hoping to take on. So Britain, I think Europe's first flyover. There's Churchill waving at it. Built to get dock traffic in very, very quickly. And of course, dock traffic doesn't need to go in to the docks anymore. And so this amazing thing that has this quality of very mundane highway, actually, we'd like to take it on and play up its kind of pier-like extraordinary qualities as it travels across what could be a sort of dune landscape with the resonance of shipbuilding and presence of the river. So spaces like its underside might be occupied in a more intensive way. And just as a reminder of why this stuff matters, this is a kind of airbrushed image of London City Island, which was sold mainly in the Far East, off-plan. And you can see that this is from an aeroplane window, interestingly, as though you're taking off from London City Airport. And you can see the river has been airbrushed into a sort of beautiful Bermudan blue with rather amazing super yachts. But I suppose the important thing is that these interventions, infrastructural interventions, which are taking many years, very difficult to argue for, but are happening in the middle of, again, full tilt developer development, and very conscious that this is another one. These towers are called something funny. Let me just have a look. Hula. But these two towers that within, rather romantically, these sort of tentacles of connection, which are actually are really busy, unpleasant roads. This is Silvertown Way, by the way. But who cares for the stuff in between development of this scale? And I suppose the kind of lacuna of when we started this project, there was lots of planning, some of which being done by some of the people in this room. And there's been a huge amount of planning, of course, around the Olympic Park. That's gone. Nobody is really thinking strategically between the borderline of this territory. And at the same time, for instance, all Tory mayoral hopefuls are talking about using public land, TfL-owned land, many of financed by Far Eastern money, perhaps, to create this sort of very, very dense housing. And I suppose this question about what are we building here, the sort of new banlieue of London, what are the connections between these spaces? And are we making, as the standard claims, a kind of this sort of Walt Whitman idea of a new Manhattan? Or are we creating something that is closer to hell? And I suppose that's a kind of open question about the quality or the extent to which we're willing to leave to laissez-faire policies the development of our periphery. I think I'll stop.